you talk about, you mentioned the whole idea of having more compact communities, and obviously that doesn't mean everyone moving to Manhattan or San Francisco or Seattle, but what is the low-hanging fruit there? I mean, what is it that people can start with?
Well, I mean, the first thing that people can do in their own lives is choose where they want to live with a more complete sort of analysis of what the costs and benefits are, right? That a lot of people tend to underestimate the impact, both financially and physically and emotionally, on their lives of long commutes, of lots of driving. And when you in fact parcel those things out, in many cases, even though a home in the suburbs may be cheaper to rent or buy, it's actually more expensive to live in than a home in a more compact community, right? Especially if it's a compact community that actually allows you to get rid of a car or two cars in the household, or or commute part-time by transit or whatever. But on a larger scale, one of the things that makes cities a really great leverage point is that they are big enough to really matter, right? Like what a city does actually is a measurable impact on the planet. But they're also small enough to actually be subject to citizen influence and participation in the debate and like small-scale interventions, right? Whereas, at the national level, much less the international level, there's really not a lot that even really large NGOs can do, right? I mean, we've seen that, right? That things are really difficult to shift when you're talking about national policy or international agreements. And so cities kind of have this real sweet spot where, if people are smart about how they do it, they can actually shift pretty large-scale change, and especially as cities start to collaborate and work with each other and be in these networks of sort of competition collaboration, doing something really well in one city tends to echo out in other cities, right? Cities are following each other's best practices, cool examples, models of how to do things differently. And so, in many cases, a small group of people pushing really hard for a specific change in one city can actually echo out through cities around the world.
What are some of the interesting things that you've seen that these different compact communities are doing as you kind of go through this research and you're kind of trying to pitch this as a way that we need to move forward? You can explain some of the different stuff that you've come across.
Yeah, well, the examples, and particularly what's cool about the various examples, change depending on what kind of a city you're talking about. European cities have different challenges and opportunities than American cities, which were built more recently by and large. And in Europe, there's a lot of really great stuff going on with eco districts and with building, sort of infill communities on former military bases or, brownfield sites and former industrial land and so forth, where they sort of upgrade all of the systems to a very high level while they're building the thing. So you have, very sustainable energy systems and, good gray water use and so on and so forth. In America, there tends to be less of that. And what has been happening here generally that's pretty good is that a number of cities have really kind of figured out that they can do sort of rapid incremental additions to neighborhoods, right? So there's neighborhood planning that tends to emphasize sort of more building up a traditional main street or a core, where a lot of American cities have run into troubles is with the sense that some people have that there's density invading their neighborhood, right? That like things are changing around them and they're not in control. And the studies are pretty clear that most people, especially most urban dwellers, actually want to live in walkable, dense communities. But the people who are like not in my backyard, the NIMBYs, are strong enough that they create a serious drag, and that's where we're finding the utility of a relatively new insight, which is that density, while it's important for, you have to have a certain level of density for it to make sense for people to walk around. You have to have a certain higher level of density for it to make sense for transit use. You have to have even a higher level of density for it to make sense for most people not to own a car, right? But what we're finding is, while those density levels are there's cultural impact there, but they're pretty steady. What that doesn't mean is that you have to have that level of density everywhere, right? And in fact, density works on averages. And so it's possible to have what I call tent pole density, where, just like a tent pole lifts up the fabric around it to make a pyramid, that you can have areas within cities that are very, very high density that actually spread some of the benefits of density out through the surrounding city without changing them. And particularly if you manage to do that in corridors or with nodes around transit or other places that link together well, what you can do is, without really changing much of anything about most of the city, transform the way the city works functionally.
Well, that is, like, when I moved to San Francisco, I mean, getting rid of my car was sort of a no-brainer. I mean, it's a pain to park, plus the parking tickets that I accrued while living there. It's really easy, and it is still walkable. I mean, it definitely makes sense. So another thing you had, like, World Changing, the book 2.0 is now, when did that come out?
Came out in March.
Came out in March. So what's different since the first iteration? Like, what have you learned? Like, what's the strategy?
Well, so the big thing that's different is, with the first edition, we talked about a whole range of approaches, ranging from some bigger things, but also a lot of personal choice issues. And with this edition, we really decided that the time has come where most people who are going to make those small choices in any meaningful way, have some insight into it, right? We don't really need to spread the news about, recycling much more.
Right.
And what we really need in any case is big systemic change. And so we've really tried to shift the emphasis of the book more on these systems that we're all enmeshed in, right? That every single one of us has connection to. And talk about what are the answers that people are coming up with for improving those systems, for restoring nature within them, for making them more efficient, more sustainable, and to give people a sense of what the big picture kind of things are. Because the fact is, we are all, even if we don't like thinking big picture, we are all enmeshed in the big picture. And so if we want to be, sort of good global citizens, right, then we need to have at least some idea of how what we're doing connects to those systems, because otherwise you can't change them in any meaningful way. If you don't know what actually is making your life work, it's really hard to really change how your life works.